My daughter, Evelyn, called me peasant stock at her rehearsal dinner. She said it in front of 200 of her fiancé's wealthy friends, spitting the words out like they were dirt. She was ashamed that my fortune came from calloused hands and construction sites, not from trust funds. But that shame didn't stop her from calling me 3 days later. Not to apologize. She wanted my $2.5 million beach house. She had no idea that she'd just handed me the blueprint for the most important lesson she would ever learn. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The room was suffocating. It was the grand ballroom at the Chatham Yacht Club, a place where the air smelled like old money and salt water. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with silver and porcelain, and the quiet clinking of champagne glasses was the only music. I looked down at my own hands, resting on the crisp, white tablecloth. They were clean, but nothing could scrub away the years of grit, the faint scars from slipped wrenches and splintered timber. These were the hands that had built an empire from nothing, yet in this room, they felt like a confession of a crime. Evelyn drifted through the crowd, a vision in a silk dress, her arm linked with her fiancé, Julian. She smiled and laughed, but her eyes kept flicking towards me, a little tick of anxiety at the corner of her mouth. She hadn't introduced me to a single person. Julian had shaken my hand once, a limp, dismissive gesture, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. I was a piece of furniture they had to arrange, a necessary but embarrassing part of the decor. I tried to make conversation with the man next to me, Julian's father, a surgeon with a jaw so tight it looked like it was carved from marble. He asked what I did, and when I said construction, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. How fascinating, he'd murmured, before turning his back to greet a senator. The message was clear. I didn't belong. The main course was served some kind of fish I couldn't pronounce, resting on a swirl of green puree. That's when Julian's father, perhaps out of a sense of bored obligation, turned back to me. "So, Arthur," he said, his voice carrying across the table. "Julian tells me you're quite the self-made man. Started with nothing, I hear." For a brief, foolish moment, I thought I saw an opening, a chance to be real. "That's right," I said, my voice feeling rough and out of place. I remember laying the foundation for my first house myself. Mixed the concrete by hand in a wheelbarrow because I couldn't afford a proper cement mixer. "Oh, Dad, please," a sharp voice cut through the air. It was Evelyn. Her face was a mask of polite horror. "No one wants to hear about your dreary work stories." She gave a tight, apologetic laugh to the table. "You have to forgive him. He comes from simple peasant stock. He can't help it." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A few people offered thin, uncomfortable smiles. Julian let out a small, condescending chuckle. But mostly, there was silence. A deep, damning silence from 200 people who heard my own daughter dismiss my entire life, my entire struggle, as something dirty. They looked away, studying their plates, their wine glasses, anywhere but at me. In that moment, I had never felt more alone. I don't remember finishing my meal. I don't remember the dessert being served. I just remember the weight of that silence, pressing down on me from all sides. I folded my napkin, placed it carefully on the table beside my untouched plate, and stood up. 200 pairs of eyes briefly registered my movement before flicking away, as if my presence was a minor inconvenience they were glad to see resolved. Evelyn didn't look at me, neither did Julian. They were already laughing at some joke his father was telling. No one said goodbye as I walked out. The heavy oak doors of the yacht club closed behind me with a soft, final click, shutting out the world where I didn't belong. The night air was cold and clean, and I breathed it in deeply, trying to wash the scent of expensive perfume and quiet contempt out of my lungs. The anger I had expected to feel never came. Instead, there was just a vast, hollow ache in my chest, a cold emptiness where a father's pride used to be. The drive home was quiet. The city lights of Boston blurred into long streaks of color through the windshield. All I could see was Evelyn's face, that tight, apologetic smile she gave to her new family as she threw her old one away. I had spent 35 years building things from dirt and dreams. I'd built a business, a reputation, a fortune. I'd built a life for her, that was a fortress against the kind of poverty and loneliness that had defined my own childhood. And she had just taken a wrecking ball to its foundation. That night, I made a decision. I took the expensive tuxedo I'd had tailored for the wedding out of my closet, laid it on the bed, and just looked at it for a long time. It felt like a costume for a part I was no longer invited to play. I wasn't going to go. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting what little dignity I had left. I would not stand in the back of a church like a hired hand, a silent, embarrassing testament to her humble origins. The wedding day came and went. My phone remained silent. I spent that Saturday at a construction site in Dorchester, walking the half-finished skeleton of a new apartment building. I ran my hand over the rough timber frames and the cool, solid concrete. This was real. This was honest. This made sense. The world Evelyn wanted was a fantasy built on smoke and mirrors. My world was built on steel and stone. I expected the silence to stretch for weeks, maybe months. I had prepared myself for it. But 3 days after she returned from her honeymoon in Italy, my phone buzzed on my desk. The screen lit up with her name, Evelyn. I stared at it, my heart giving a sudden heavy thud. For a moment, a foolish flicker of hope ignited. Maybe this was it. The apology, the moment of clarity. With a deep breath, I answered. "Hello? Dad," she said. Her voice was different. Not warm, not apologetic. It was thin and tight and strained. There was an edge of panic to it I hadn't heard since she'd wrecked her first car at 17. "Dad, we need to talk. It's important. Can we meet? My office is not a place for pleasantries. It's a functional space, built for work, not for show. It sits in a converted warehouse at the edge of our main construction yard, smelling faintly of sawdust and fresh paint. The walls are covered in blueprints and building permits, not expensive art. The only comfortable chair is the one I'm sitting in. I designed it that way. It keeps meetings short and to the point." When Evelyn and Julian walked in, they looked like two exotic birds that had flown into a hardware store by mistake. Evelyn wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my first truck. Julian was in a tailored suit, but the fabric was slightly rumpled, and he couldn't seem to find a place to put his hands. They perched awkwardly on the two simple wooden chairs opposite my metal desk. I didn't say anything. I just waited. My silence was a tool I'd sharpened over years of tough negotiations. The person who talks first is the one who needs something more. Evelyn broke. "Dad," she started, her voice tight. "Thank you for seeing us." She wrung her hands in her lap, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Preston and I are having some financial difficulties. Rich people never say they're broke. They have difficulties." I just nodded, my face a blank slate, and gestured for her to continue. She took a shaky breath, and the story tumbled out. It was a predictable tale of greed and stupidity. Julian had made some aggressive investments. Cryptocurrency, mostly. A tech startup that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. He'd lost hundreds of thousands. Then came the credit cards, 17 of them, all maxed out on a honeymoon in Italy, designer clothes, and $1,000 dinners. Julian sat beside her, staring at the floor like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. He didn't add a word, didn't defend himself. He just let his wife do the dirty work. The number she finally landed on was breathtaking, $847,000 in debt. Still, for a family like the Blackwoods, it should have been manageable. "Can't Julian's family help?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Evelyn let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "That's the thing, Dad. Julian's family, the Blackwood fortune, isn't what everyone thinks it is." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a humiliation so profound it was almost painful to watch. His grandfather lost most of the money decades ago. His father has been mortgaging their properties for years just to maintain the lifestyle. It's all smoke and mirrors. They're broke. We're broke. So there it was. The truth. My daughter, who had been so ashamed of my calloused hands and my honest work, had married into a family of frauds. She had traded real gold for glittering dust. Even the $400,000 from the trust fund I had set up for her was gone, vaporized in Julian's bad bets. She finally broke down then, the carefully constructed mask of composure shattering into pieces. Sobs shook her body. "We're going to lose everything," she whispered through her tears. "The apartment, the cars, everything." I watched her cry, and I felt nothing. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort her, to fix everything, had been killed in that ballroom. After a long moment, she wiped a tear from her cheek, and the desperation in her eyes hardened into something else, something familiar. "Dad," she said, her voice now steady, "there is a way to fix this, but I need you to do something for me." I watched as my daughter transformed before my eyes. The desperate, crying child from moments ago was gone, replaced by a cool, calculating stranger. She squared her shoulders and looked at me, not with the eyes of a daughter asking for help, but with the hard stare of a creditor demanding payment. "It's not money I need, Dad," she said, her voice devoid of the tremor it had held just a minute before. "Money is temporary. We need an asset. We need the beach house." The beach house, my place in Cape Cod. It wasn't just a property. It was a symbol. It was 4,000 square feet of oceanfront proof that a boy from an orphanage could make it. It was where I planned to retire, to watch the tide come in, to finally rest. It was the one thing I had built purely for myself. "My house?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Just temporarily," she said quickly, as if the word could soften the blow of her audacity. "We need to sell it to cover our debts. Julian has some big deals in the works, international consulting, high-level stuff. Once those come through, we'll buy it back for you. It's just lending. Family. Helping family." Family. She used that word now. We weren't family when she needed to impress the Blackwoods, but we were family when she needed to liquidate my dreams. "So let me understand this," I said, leaning forward. "You want me to sign over a $2.6 million property, my most valuable personal asset, so your husband can pay off debts from crypto schemes. And your plan to repay me is based on big deals that don't exist yet." "When you put it like that, it sounds," she trailed off, frowning. "It sounds like what, Evelyn? Like a terrible business proposal?" "Because that's what it is." Her face flushed with anger. The desperation was burning away, revealing the raw entitlement underneath. "This isn't a business proposal, Dad. This is about my life. Our lives. Julian's family will disown him if he files for bankruptcy. We'll have nothing. You'll have what I had at your age," I said, the word sharp. "Nothing." "That's different," she snapped. "You didn't have anything to lose." "I had my dignity," I replied, my voice dropping to a near whisper. The statement hung in the air between us, an accusation she refused to acknowledge. She stood up, her composure finally cracking. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I can't believe you're being so selfish. After everything I've sacrificed growing up with you." "Oh." Sacrificed. The word hit me like a physical blow. "What sacrifices, Evelyn?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear her version of reality. Having to explain why my father owned a construction company instead of a bank. Why we lived in a nice house instead of an estate. Having to be ashamed of my own background while all my friends had histories, had breeding. There it was. The ugly, unvarnished truth. All my years of hard work, all the love, all the provision in her eyes, it was all just a source of shame, a liability. I looked at this stranger, standing in my office, a woman who had my daughter's face but none of her heart, and I felt the last bit of warmth I held for her turn to ice. "So, will you help us?" she demanded, her voice high and strained. "Yes or no?" I stayed silent for a long moment, letting her question hang in the air. I saw the whole pathetic picture with perfect, painful clarity. This wasn't a request, it was a demand. And in that moment, she said the 7 words that sealed her fate and ignited my resolve. "You owe me this, Dad." I sat there for a long time after she left, the echo of her final words. "You owe me this," hanging in the air like poison gas. The engine of her expensive car roared to life, and then faded down the gravel road, leaving behind a profound silence. It was in that silence that the ice in my veins began to harden into something solid, something like resolve. The door to my office creaked open. It was Frank, my site foreman and my oldest friend. He's a stout man with hands like leather mallets and a face that has been weathered by 30 years of New England winters. He'd been with me since the days we were framing houses ourselves, just two young men with more ambition than sense. He can read my moods better than anyone. He held 2 mugs of steaming coffee, setting one on the corner of my cluttered desk. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just looked at the 2 empty chairs, then back at me. "That was Evelyn's Mercedes, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "She drove out of here like the yard was on fire." I managed a grim smile and took a sip of the coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way I liked it. "There's a fire. All right, Frank. A dumpster fire." "Oh." He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Want to talk about it?" I hadn't planned to, but suddenly I needed to say it out loud, to hear the words in a room where common sense still lived. "She and that husband of hers are broke, in debt up to their eyeballs. She wants my Cape Cod house to pay for their mistakes." Frank's face, normally kind, hardened. He was silent for a moment, processing. "She wants you to sell your dream home? The place you were finally going to hang up your tool belt for?" He shook his head slowly, a look of genuine disbelief on his face. "After the wedding? After everything?" "She feels I owe it to her," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Frank let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "You owe her? Artie, let me tell you what you owe." He took a step into the room. 20 years ago, my boy got sick. Real sick. The insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment. You wrote a check for $50,000 without blinking an eye. You told me, "Family takes care of family, Frank. That boy is a healthy man with his own kids now because of you." He pointed a thick finger at my chest. "You've paid your dues 100 times over. You don't owe that girl a damn thing more than what you've already given her, which was everything." His words, honest and raw, cut through the cold fog in my mind. He was right. My debts weren't to her. My real debts were to the past. To the scared, lonely boy I used to be. The one who swore that if he ever made it, he would never forget where he came from. Evelyn had forgotten, but I hadn't. A new idea began to form, not yet clear, but it felt right. It felt like steel. I looked up at my oldest friend, and for the first time since Evelyn had walked in, I felt a sense of purpose. The hurt was still there, but now it had a direction. "Thank you, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "You're right, I know exactly who I owe." After Frank left, I didn't go home. Instead, I found myself driving, my truck moving on an instinct older than any business deal. I drove through the heart of Boston and headed towards Dorchester, the neighborhood where my story had begun. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older. I parked across from a familiar, tired-looking brick building with a rusty iron fence, Street Mary's Children's Home. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as it had 40 years ago. I could see the crack in the third step where I'd fallen and split my chin. I could see the window of the dormitory I used to share with 8 other boys, a window I'd stared out of for hours, praying for a family that never came. The paint was peeling, and the roof looked worryingly sagged in one corner. This place, which had saved me, was itself in desperate need of saving. Every month for the last 20 years, I'd written a check for $5,000 and mailed it to this address. No publicity, no tax write-offs. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the debt I owed. But sitting here now, looking at the crumbling facade, I knew it wasn't enough. It was like putting a bandage on a structural wound. My hands felt heavy as I pulled out my phone and dialed the main number from memory. A young, cheerful voice answered. "Street! Mary's. How can I help you?" "Hello," I said, my own voice sounding rough. "Could I please speak with Sister Agnes?" There was a pause. "May I ask who is calling?" "This is Arthur Miller. I'm an old friend." A moment later, a different voice came on the line, a voice I would have recognized anywhere. It was softer with age, but still held the same warmth and patient kindness that had soothed my nightmares when I was 8 years old. "Arthur, child, is that really you?" I was a 55-year-old man, but to her, I would always be that scared little boy. A lump formed in my throat. "It's me, sister. How are you?" "Oh, same as always," she sighed, a gentle weariness in her tone. trying to keep 47 children fed and happy with not enough money and too many needs. Your monthly check is a godsend, Arthur, truly. 47 children. Almost the exact same number as when I was there. How's the funding situation, really? I pressed. Tight. Always tight. The state gives us just enough to keep the lights on, but the building, this old place, is falling apart, Arthur. The roof leaks. The heating is a relic from the 60s. The children deserve better. A question formed on my lips, driven by a new, urgent purpose. What would make the biggest difference right now, sister? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you wish for? She laughed softly. Oh, that's a dangerous question. If I'm being honest, we desperately need a new building. A place with proper rooms, not dormitories. A library, a real playground. But that's just a dream. We'd need at least $2 million, maybe more. It's an impossible amount. $2 million. The number echoed in my head, colliding with another number. 2.6 million. The value of my house in Cape Cod. The house Evelyn wanted to sell to pay for her husband's foolishness. In that instant, the blueprint in my mind became crystal clear. It was a plan so simple, so perfect, so right, that it took my breath away. The pain Evelyn had caused me hadn't been for nothing. It was a catalyst. It had led me right here, to this moment, to this one perfect solution. Sister? I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. Yes, child, I think I can help. The next morning, I was in downtown Boston at my attorney's office by 8 a.m. sharp. David Chen has been handling my legal affairs for over a decade. He's a sharp, no-nonsense man who has seen me make plenty of multi-million-dollar decisions, but he wasn't prepared for this one. He stared at me over his reading glasses, the papers I'd asked him to prepare spread across his mahogany desk. Arthur, let me be absolutely clear, he said, his voice laced with concern. You want to donate your Cape Cod property valued at $2.6 million to Street Mary's Children's Home, and you want this donation to be irrevocable, meaning, once you sign, there is no going back. Ever. That's exactly what I want, David, I said, my voice firm. This is your retirement home, Artie. Your biggest personal asset. Can I ask why? He pressed gently. He knew about the situation with Evelyn at the wedding. He'd been on the original guest list. Let's just say I'm reinvesting in my roots, I replied. He sighed, sensing he wouldn't get more out of me. If this is about revenge... This isn't about revenge, David. I cut him off, but my tone was calm. This is about values, the kind you can't put a price on. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded and picked up his pen. Okay, the papers will be ready to sign by tomorrow. What else? I need one more thing, I said, leaning forward. I want this to be public. I'm going to need a camera crew. David's eyebrows shot up. This was new territory. A camera crew? Why? Because some lessons need to be taught in the light of day, I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for a local news station, Channel 7. I spoke to a veteran reporter named Janet Morrison, telling her I had a major philanthropic announcement that would be of great interest to her viewers, one with a very compelling human interest angle. The promise of genuine drama was enough to secure her commitment. A crew would be at my office tomorrow at 2 o'clock. With all the pieces in place, there was only one call left to make. I took a deep breath and dialed Evelyn's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with impatience. Dad, have you thought about it? I have, Evelyn, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral like a businessman discussing a contract. I've made my decision about the house. I could hear the quick intake of breath on the other end, the sound of relief. And? She pressed. I want to discuss it in person. This is a big decision. It deserves a proper conversation. Can you and Julian come to my office tomorrow, 2:30 in the afternoon? There was a pause. She was suspicious of the formality, but the prize was too great to risk. Okay, yes, we'll be there. Will we be signing the papers then? Everything will be settled tomorrow, Evelyn, I said, the words carefully chosen. Just be there. I hung up before she could ask more questions. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the city I had helped to build. The trap was set. The players were in position. Tomorrow, my daughter would arrive expecting a handout. Instead, She would receive a lesson in foundations, the kind you build a life on. The next day, my office felt like the calm eye of a hurricane. Outside, the yard was a symphony of roaring engines and shouting men, the normal sounds of my life. But inside, there was a heavy, waiting silence. At 2 o'clock sharp, the Channel 7 news crew arrived. Janet Morrison, the reporter, was all business, directing her cameraman to find the best angle. They set up their equipment quietly, their professionalism adding a surreal gravity to the room. A few minutes later, Sister Agnes arrived, clutching a worn leather folder to her chest. She looked small and out of place against the backdrop of industrial equipment, her gentle face etched with a mixture of nervousness and hope. I poured her a glass of water and gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Are you ready, sister?" I asked. She nodded, her grip tightening on the folder. "I'm ready to tell the world about my children, Arthur. Thank you for this chance." "You're the one who gave me a chance, a long time ago," I said. We sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, two people from different worlds, united by a shared past and a common purpose. At precisely 2:30, the door swung open. Evelyn and Julian strode in, radiating a confidence that was almost blinding. Evelyn was wearing a sharp, white business suit, looking every inch the executive's wife. Julian had a triumphant smirk on his face, as if he had just closed the deal of a lifetime. They were dressed for a victory ceremony. Then they saw the room. The smirk on Julian's face vanished, replaced by a flicker of alarm. Evelyn's confident stride faltered. Her eyes darted from the camera and microphone to the gentle-faced nun sitting quietly in the corner, and finally to me. The triumphant glow in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a dawning, confused horror. She knew instantly that this was not the meeting she had been expecting. "Dad?" she said, her voice a sharp, questioning whisper. "What is all this? Who are these people?" I remained seated behind my desk, my hands resting calmly on its metal surface. I gestured towards the two empty chairs. "Sit down, Evelyn. Julian, please." They sat, their movements stiff and wary. They looked like two predators who had just realized they'd walked into a trap. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the sudden, dramatic shift in power. They were no longer in control. I was. "Evelyn, Julian, I'd like you to meet some people," I said, my voice even and calm. "This is Sister Agnes. She runs Street Mary's Children's Home in Dorchester." "Oh." Sister Agnes gave a polite nod. Evelyn stared at her blankly, the name meaning nothing. "And this," I continued, gesturing to the reporter, "is Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News." Now Julian spoke, his voice tight with suspicion. "What in God's name is going on, Arthur? Did you call the press?" "We're here to make an announcement, Julian," I said, my eyes never leaving my daughter's face. "An announcement about my Cape Cod property." I stood, the thick stack of legal documents feeling heavy and final in my hand. The camera's small red light blinked on. "Thank you all for coming," I began, looking directly at my daughter, whose face had gone pale. 3 days ago, Evelyn came to me with a request. I held the stack of papers in my hand and looked at my daughter. The confusion in her eyes was warring with a sense of entitlement. She still believed this was somehow about her, a formality before her victory. 3 days ago, I began, my voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the quiet room. My daughter Evelyn and her husband Julian came to me for help. They asked me to give them my beach house in Cape Cod, a property valued at $2.6 million, to cover some debts. I paused, letting the statement hang in the air for the camera to capture. Evelyn shifted in her chair, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought I was recounting this to build up to my grand act of fatherly generosity. "Evelyn was right about one thing," I continued. "I do owe a debt. After everything I've been given in this life, I owe a great deal." I turned my gaze from her and looked at Sister Agnes, whose hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "But my debt is not to those who have everything and squander it. My debt is to the children who are growing up the way I did, with nothing, with no one, with no hope, except for the kindness of strangers." The color drained from Evelyn's face. Julian's jaw tightened. They were finally beginning to understand. I turned to the camera, to the invisible audience that would soon be witnesses. "My name is Arthur Miller. 47 years ago, I was one of those children, living at Street Mary's home. Today, I am the owner of a successful construction company. I lifted the paper slightly, and today, I am donating that $2.6 million house in its entirety to Sister Agnes and the children of Street Mary's, so they can build a new facility where every child can have a real bedroom, a real library, and a real chance at the life they deserve. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Sister Agnes let out a soft gasp, her eyes filling with tears of disbelief and joy. Janet Morrison, the reporter, looked like she had just struck gold. Then chaos erupted. "What?" Julian shot to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "Are you out of your mind?" Evelyn just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. "Dad, no," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you can't. You can't be serious." I ignored them. In the sudden clamor, I sat down, pulled a heavy black fountain pen from my pocket, the same pen I used to sign my first major building contract, and uncapped it with a deliberate click. I spread the first of the 3 copies of the donation papers on my desk. "David, is this document legally binding upon my signature?" I asked my attorney, who was standing quietly in the corner. "It is, Arthur. Absolutely and irrevocably." "Good," I said, and with a steady hand I signed my name on the dotted line. The stroke of the pen was loud in the tense room, a final, definitive scratch of ink on paper. The sight of my signature seemed to break Evelyn's paralysis. She lunged forward, her hand outstretched, as if to snatch the papers from the desk. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "You can't do this! That's my house!" My lawyer, David, stepped forward, placing a calm hand on Evelyn's arm before she could reach my desk. "I'm sorry, Miss Miller," he said, his voice firm but polite. "The document has been signed in the presence of a notary. It's legally binding. That was our house." Julian snarled, his face a mask of crimson rage. He took a step towards me, his finger jabbing in the air. "You senile old bastard, do you have any idea what you've just done?" I looked past him, directly into the camera lens. "Janet, did you get that?" I asked calmly. "Mr. Blackwood seems to be under the impression that my house was his house." The reporter nodded, her expression grimly focused. This was better than she could have ever imagined. Sister Agnes, seeing the situation spiraling, stood up. Her voice was soft, an appeal to the humanity she still believed existed in them. "My dear," she said, looking at Evelyn, "perhaps I should explain what this donation will mean for the children. It will give them a chance at—" "Nobody cares about your damn children!" Julian roared, turning his fury on the small, gentle nun. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the camera. Janet Morrison's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening in genuine shock. Even Evelyn stared at her husband in horror, as if seeing him for the first time. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. He had revealed the rotten core of their shared philosophy. I let the ugly words hang in the air for a long moment before picking up my pen again. "No, Julian," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You just spoke honestly for the first time since I met you." I pulled the second copy of the papers towards me and signed my name with another deliberate stroke. "Dad, stop!" Evelyn was crying now, real tears of desperation. "You're destroying our lives." "Am I?" I asked, looking up at her. "Or am I finally showing you what a life is actually worth?" I signed the third and final copy. It was done. I pushed the signed stack of papers across the desk, towards a tearful, grateful Sister Agnes. I stood up and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet in front of my daughter. "You called me peasant stock, sweetheart. And you know what? You were right." Her face crumpled in on itself. Peasants work the land. Peasants build things from dirt and sweat. They understand that you have to put something into the world before you can take something out. They give more than they take. I took a step closer. I am proud to be peasant stock, because peasants like me understand something that people like you, who are born into privilege you never earned, will never grasp. "What's that?" she whispered, her voice broken. "That the only wealth that truly matters is the wealth you give away." "You've ruined us," Julian spat, his final, pathetic attempt at defiance. Good, I said, turning my back on him. Maybe losing everything will finally teach you what everything actually means. He grabbed Evelyn's arm, his face pale with humiliation and rage. Come on, he muttered. We're leaving. As they reached the door, Evelyn turned back, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and pain. I will never forgive you for this, she hissed. I know, I said quietly, but maybe someday you'll thank me. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The storm had passed. That evening, I didn't go out. I stayed in my simple apartment, the one I'd kept since before the business took off, and made myself a simple dinner. At 6 o'clock, I turned on the television to Channel 7. I needed to see it for myself, to see how the world would interpret the demolition I had orchestrated. Janet Morrison's face appeared, serious and professional. A local businessman made headlines today in a story of family, fortune, and a stunning act of charity, she began. The report was brutal and unflinching. It showed everything. My calm announcement, Evelyn's shocked face, and then the main event, Julian, his face contorted in rage, screaming at a nun that nobody cared about her damn children. It was even uglier on screen than it had been in person. The report ended with my final speech about being proud to be peasant stock. Before the segment was even over, my phone began to buzz, and it didn't stop. It was a relentless vibration on the kitchen table, a tidal wave of reaction from a world that had just been given a front-row seat to my family's implosion. The first texts were from business contacts. Saw you on the news, Arthur. You're a damn hero. Another said, my wife and I cried. God bless those kids. Frank texted simply, that's my boss. Then came the messages from strangers as the story hit social media. Janet forwarded me screenshots. A headline from a popular blog read, CEO donates $2. 6 M home to orphans instead of entitled daughter. The comments were a wildfire. This is what accountability looks like. Did you see the son-in-law? Career suicide in 5432? That one made me smile. Julian's high-level consulting firm was likely dead before it ever began. But not all the messages were supportive. A text from my ex-wife, Linda, was sharp and angry. How could you do that to your own daughter, Arthur? You humiliate her in public? Family is supposed to come first. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years chimed in. You'll regret this. Blood is thicker than water. They didn't understand. They saw a family dispute. I saw a necessary surgery to save a soul. The most important call of the night came around 8:30. It was Sister Agnes, and for the first time I could remember, her voice was breathless with excitement. Arthur, you need to hear this. The phone's here. They haven't stopped ringing since the story aired. We've received over $40,000 in online donations. In 2 hours. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the chill from Linda's text. That's wonderful, sister. There's more, she exclaimed. The owner of a major construction supply company in Quincy just called. He wants to donate all the lumber for the new building. A furniture store in Newton wants to give a bed and a desk for every single room. Arthur, this isn't just about the house anymore. This is about inspiration. You've inspired people. I hung up, my mind reeling. It was working. The lesson wasn't just for Evelyn, it was for everyone. I had thrown a stone into a pond, and the ripples were turning into waves of kindness. I looked at my phone, still buzzing with a mixture of praise and condemnation. Doing the right thing, I realized, didn't mean everyone would agree with you. It just meant you could live with yourself when the noise finally died down. I was about to turn in for the night when my phone rang again. It was close to midnight. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling I knew who was on the other end. I let it ring 4 times before answering, gathering my thoughts. Hello? A small, hésitant voice answered. Dad? It was Evelyn, but she sounded like a ghost of her former self. All the sharp, arrogant edges had been worn away, leaving behind something raw and broken. Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I saw the news, she whispered, and the comments online. People are saying the most terrible things about me. Her voice broke. They're calling me spoiled, entitled, a monster. And do you disagree with them? I asked quietly. There was a long pause on the other end, filled only by the sound of her shaky breathing. I don't know anymore, she finally admitted. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. Dad, I'm scared, she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. Everything is falling apart. Julian's parents called. They're talking about an annulment. They said we embarrassed the family name. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. The family that she had prized for their image, and their name was now casting her out to protect that very same image. They were throwing her away, just as she had thrown me away because she was now an embarrassment. What about Julian? I asked. He's a coward, she spat, a flash of her old fire returning for a moment. He's blaming me for everything. He's talking about running away to Florida, to some uncle's place. He wants me to just disappear. And what do you want to do? I don't want to run away, she said, her voice dropping back to a whisper. But I don't know how to face this. My friends won't answer my calls. My credit cards are being declined. I have nothing. She was right. She had finally arrived at the place where my life had begun. Nothing. For the first time, we were standing on common ground. I could have offered her money. I could have offered her a room in my apartment. That would have been the easy thing to do. It would have also been the wrong thing to do. Rescuing her now would teach her nothing. Do you remember, I began, my voice softening slightly, what I taught you about falling off your bike when you were 7 years old? I could hear her sniffle. You said the only way to stop being afraid was to get back on. That's right, I said. This isn't just falling, Evelyn. This is crashing. And sometimes, crashing is the only way to learn how to ride properly. But what am I supposed to do now? She pleaded, her voice cracking. I thought of myself at her age, armed with nothing but a $50 food cart and a desperate will to survive. I had no one to call, no one to ask for help, and it was the greatest gift I was ever given, because it forced me to rely on myself. I had to give her a small piece of that gift. You do what I did when I had nothing, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. You figure it out. I hung up the phone, leaving her alone with my words and the echoing silence of her shattered life. It was the hardest thing I had ever done as a father, and the most necessary. 6 months passed. 6 months of silence from Evelyn, and 6 months of furious, hopeful noise in Dorchester. The donation had, as Sister Agnes predicted, inspired a wave of generosity. My single act had become a foundation upon which a whole community had started to build. The story had faded from the news cycle, but the work had continued, day after day. Today, I was walking through the hallways of the new St. Mary's Children's Home. It was no longer a dream on a blueprint. It was real. The smell of fresh paint and new carpeting filled the air. Sunlight streamed through large, clean windows into rooms that were bright and airy. Each room had only 2 beds, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a brand new playground. No more dormitories. No more cramped, dark spaces. Sister Agnes walked beside me, her face a constant, beaming smile. She was thinner, tired from the months of oversight, but her eyes shone with a light I hadn't seen before. The library is at the end of the hall, she said, her voice filled with pride. A bookstore chain donated 10,000 books. 10,000, Arthur. More books than these children have ever seen in their lives. We walked past a computer lab with 30 new stations, all donated. We looked out at the playground, where a team of volunteers from a local landscaping company were laying down soft green sod. My donation had been the seed, but the kindness of strangers had made it a forest. I felt a profound sense of peace, a rightness that settled deep in my bones. The anger and hurt from that night at the yacht club felt like a distant memory, a storm that had passed and cleared the air. I had taken the ugliest moment of my life and used it to build something beautiful. It was the best construction project I had ever managed. We ended the tour in her new, simple office. It was twice the size of her old one, but just as humble. As I was about to leave, she hesitated for a moment. The donations still come in, you know, she said softly. Smaller ones now. $5 from a pensioner, $20 from a student. People haven't forgotten. She reached for a small stack of mail on her desk and picked out a single, plain white envelope. And this one. This came for you yesterday. It was addressed to the home, but I believe it's personal. She handed it to me. It was light, almost weightless, but the moment I saw the handwriting on the front, my heart gave a heavy thud against my ribs. It was elegant, slanting cursive, the kind they teach in expensive private schools. It had been 6 months. 6 months of absolute, unbroken silence. I hadn't known if she was in Florida with Julian or living on the streets of Boston. Now, here was a sign. A message from a life I had completely disconnected from. It was a letter from Evelyn. I walked back to my truck, the plain white envelope feeling heavier than a brick in my hand. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just staring at my own name written in my daughter's familiar cursive. Part of me didn't want to open it. I was afraid of what I might find inside: more excuses, more demands, a final, hateful tirade. 6 months of silence had been a kind of peace, and I was terrified of shattering it. But I had to know. With a deep breath, I tore open the seal. The first thing that fell out onto my lap was not a letter, but a check. It was a personal check from a bank I didn't recognize. The amount was written in Evelyn's hand: $5,000. It was made out to Street Mary's Children's Home, and in the signature line it read, Evelyn Miller. She had dropped his name. That alone told me more than 1,000 words could. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was short. There was no flowery language, no dramatic pleading. It was simple, direct, and stripped bare of all her former arrogance. "Dad," it began, "I've been waiting to write this until I had something to say that wasn't just words. Preston and I divorced 3 months ago. I'm living in a studio apartment in South Boston. I'm working as a server at a diner downtown. It's hard, but for the first time, I'm learning what real work feels like. For the past 4 months, I've been volunteering at a food kitchen on the weekends. It was your friend Frank who suggested it. He saw me at the diner one day and didn't say a word about what happened. He just told me where I could find a place to be useful. This donation is from my own savings. Every dollar of it is from my paychecks and my tips. It's not much, I know. It's probably what you used to spend on a single bottle of wine for dinner. But it's mine. It's the first money I've ever really earned, and I wanted the children at Street Mary's to have it. I don't expect you to forgive me. Maybe not ever. But I hope someday you'll be proud of me again. Love, Evelyn." I read the letter twice, then a third time, the words blurring through the tears that had started to well up in my eyes. It wasn't the money. $5,000 was a pittance compared to what had been lost. It was the source: tips, savings, money earned through tired feet and aching shoulders. It was the fact that she had dropped her married name. The fact that she had found humility not in losing a fortune, but in earning a wage. The ice that had encased my heart for 6 long months began to crack. This wasn't the entitled stranger who had screamed at me in my office. This was a new person, someone being built from the ground up. This check wasn't a payment. It was a cornerstone. I carefully folded the letter and the check and slid them into my wallet right beside the monthly check I was about to write to Street Mary's myself. I wasn't ready to call her. Not yet. The wound was deep, and it needed more time to heal. But for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a flicker of hope for my daughter. It was just a piece of paper, but it was the strongest foundation she had ever built. Another 6 months passed. I didn't call her. I knew this was a path she had to walk on her own. I sent my monthly check to Street Mary's, and I focused on my work. But I kept the letter in my wallet, a silent testament to the hope I was nursing. I was giving her the one thing I had never been able to give her before, the space to build something for herself. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was her. I answered, and the voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't the arrogant stranger from the yacht club, or the broken child from that midnight phone call. This voice was calm, confident, and light. It was the voice of my daughter. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Evelyn," I replied, a real smile spreading across my face. "It's good to hear your voice. I wanted to tell you something," she said, and I could hear the pride in her tone. They promoted me to assistant manager at the diner, and I've been accepted into the nonprofit management program at UMass Boston. Classes start in the fall. I felt a swell of pride so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. She had found a direction, not one that I had paved for her with money, but one she had carved out for herself with hard work and a newfound purpose. That's wonderful news, sweetheart. Truly wonderful. Dad, she said, her voice softening, I get it now. I just wanted you to know that. I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. She took a breath. That the only wealth that matters is what you give away. The words I had waited a lifetime to hear. I'm proud of you, Evelyn, I said, my voice thick with emotion. More than you'll ever know. Does this mean, would you have dinner with me sometime? She asked, a little hesitantly. I'd like that very much, I said. There's a little Italian place near my apartment, she offered. Nothing fancy. Just good food and honest prices. Sounds perfect, I said. We made a plan for the following week and said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the small balcony of my apartment, looking up at the stars. Somewhere across the city, 75 children were sleeping safely in warm beds, in a home built from the rubble of my own pain. And somewhere else, my daughter was getting ready for her shift, a woman who had found her own worth not in a mansion, but in a humble diner. I had given away a house of wood and nails, a monument to my own success. But in return, I had gotten my daughter back. I had helped build a real home for children who had none, and I had finally repaired the broken foundations of my own. I had lost a house, but I had gained everything that truly matters. In life, they say we sometimes build the highest walls, not to keep people out, but to see who cares enough to tear them down. The story of Arthur and Evelyn reminds us that the true foundation of a family isn't built with money or status, but with respect, understanding, and forgiveness. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the most valuable gifts, because they force us to tear down who we were, to rebuild someone better and stronger. True worth isn't found in what we own, but in what we give away. Not all of us have $1 million home to donate, but every single one of us has kindness to share, time to listen, and a heart big enough to love. Those are the real bricks that build a meaningful life. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Arthur did the right thing? And don't forget to follow our channel so you won't miss another meaningful story about life and family.